Well, thank you so much, Ron. Ron LeClair, obviously a fantastic candidate for Windsor, or for Windsor Essex. I guess Essex technically is the name of the riding. And I'm really happy to be here with Lisa and Gemma as well, and all of these wonderful nurses that are with us this morning. Because our message is we can stop the cuts. We can stop the cuts and make sure people have the kind of health care that they need and deserve. And I'm thankful to be in the yard of a wonderful person's home in their backyard, because we want to also talk about home care today. Home care has really suffered over the last number of years, and we know we can fix that. We can make home care such that everybody gets the amount of home care that they need, no matter where they live in our province. But in order to do that, we have to stop the cuts, and we have to invest in home care so that people can get not only the home care services, but also things like help with driving to appointments, assistance with meal preparation. We can do that by investing, by hiring 30,000 more nurses in this province, by hiring 10,000 more PSWs, by making sure those jobs are good jobs, full-time jobs that people can build their own lives on, and making sure that we're increasing wages for PSWs, making sure that the nursing staff that we have, whether it's in home care or anywhere else, is respected, getting rid of the horrendous Bill 124, the low-wage policy that Doug Ford brought to Ontario. Making sure that we return, we recruit, and we train new healthcare workers into the healthcare field so that these fantastic nurses and other healthcare workers have the kinds of supports and the kinds of workplaces that allow them to do the job that they love and do it properly. Imagine knowing for certain that your mom, for example, is going to get the home care services that she needs every time. That there is not going to be a sudden cancellation or a situation where the staff just don't show up because there aren't enough staff on shift, or because the company that provides the home care is not booking properly and creating chaos in community. Just imagine your peace of mind knowing that your mom or your loved one is going to get the care they need. So we are also going to take the profits out of home care, out of long-term care. We're going to take the profits out and put the care back in. These wonderful human beings that provide that care know how important it is to have the time to provide the kinds of supports, the kind of connection, the kind of human care that people need and deserve. And the good news is we can make sure that happens. But we know for sure that Ford's cuts, that conservative cuts, are only going to make it worse. So this time, what we need to do is come together and stop the cuts. Stop conservative cuts. Make sure we're investing in our home care, long-term care, and hospital care system, our entire healthcare system. We can do it. And so this time, let's do that together here in this riding. On June 2nd, literally a couple of days away, vote for Ron LeClair. Vote for Ron LeClair. We'll stop the cuts and make sure we can make those important investments in healthcare and home care. Vote for Lisa Gretzky in Windsor West. Vote for Gemma Gray-Hall in Windsor-Tecumseh, and we will be sure to stop those cuts and invest in the home care and healthcare services that people deserve, and respect the wonderful workers like the ones we have with us. Respect them and give them the opportunity to provide the great care that we need and that they want to provide. I thank everybody for being here this morning. I want to say we respect the work that you do, and that's what you need, a government that actually respects what you do and is a partner in making sure we take care of Ontarians. So on that note, I'll take any questions that folks might have.
We'll move to on-site questions first. First question comes from Natasha MacDonald-Dupuy from Radio Canada.
Morning, Andrea.
Hi, Natasha.
If there's one riding in Ontario that Doug Ford wants to grab from the NDP, it is Essex. He's been talking about it for 2 or 3 years now. It's shaping up to be a tight race. Why do you think the PC's message is resonating with so many people here?
I think what's resonating with people here in Essex as well as around Ontario is a real understanding that Ford cuts will hurt people, that more conservative cuts are not what we need in our province right now. What we need is investment in our healthcare system. We need to take care of our seniors. We need to make sure that when people go to hospital, they're not waiting for hours and hours and sometimes days in an emergency ward on a gurney before being admitted to hospital, sometimes for hours and hours before being even seen by somebody in Emerge. Not because those folks don't want to provide that service, but because conservative cuts are going to make things worse. And I think people understand that. And I do have to say this. Let's not forget, the minute Doug Ford got elected in Ontario, he started cutting. He started cutting in healthcare. He started cutting in home care. He started cutting in long-term care. And we know that if we give him the chance, he's just going to cut more. So I think that's what the people in Essex are talking about. Those are the things that our candidates here in Windsor are hearing from people on the doorstep. But the good news is, this time, we can make sure that we stop Ford from making those cuts and get the kinds of health care and the quality of care that people deserve.
We're seeing quite a low turnout in advanced polling. Stephen Del Duca has said that this advantage is the Liberals because it means that many voters are undecided. Others might see it as a sign of voter apathy. What do you make of that, and is this good or bad for the NDP?
Well, what I would say to all of the people of Ontario is there's a lot at stake in this election. There's a lot at stake. We've seen what COVID has unveiled in terms of a crippled healthcare system that was made that way initially by the cuts and the firing of healthcare staff by the Liberals. But we've seen Doug Ford. We've seen Conservatives, not only with Doug Ford at the helm, but in the past, Conservatives always cut. And we know that that is not what we need right now in our province. And so that's why I'm saying to folks, with so much at stake in this election, let's come together. Let's come together and make sure that we stop the Conservative cuts and we start providing the quality of health care that people deserve.
Next question comes from Jessica Smith from the Canadian Press.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Andrea. We know cost of living is a main concern for voters in this election, and we've heard a lot about housing and gas prices, but we haven't heard as much about the cost of food prices. Can you explain the NDP's proposed provincial food strategy and what you're hoping to accomplish with it? I'm
really glad you asked that question, Jessica, particularly in this part of Ontario. This part of Ontario is part of the food basket. I mean, let's face it, the riding of Essex particularly, there is a lot of agricultural production that happens here, and we need to be very thoughtful about supporting farmers, farm families, our agricultural economy, and making sure that more and more of the food that we produce here is available to all of Ontario. And not taking that for granted is a big part of why we talk about it in our platform, because we need these farms to be productive. We need these farm families to be able to earn the kind of living that they should be earning, and we need young farmers to continue to be engaged in farming. And so that's why our platform does talk about farms. The last thing we need are huge highways to big mansions that nobody can afford, while those highways pave over farmland and pave over wetlands and pave over environmentally sensitive areas and dig into the green belt and dig into the Holland Marsh. That's Doug Ford's vision. It's a vision from the 1950s. We have to make sure we're protecting farmland and that we are providing the opportunity for Ontarians in every part of our province to really have access to the amazing agricultural products that are grown and harvested right here in this very region.
And can you explain how the Grocery Code of Conduct would help with rising food prices?
What we've seen too often, and we saw it with bread, if you recall that, we've seen the grocery chains, the big ones particularly, collude in price collusion schemes to really disadvantage the consumer and to create an environment where they keep the costs artificially high because they are preventing competition, and that's not a good thing. We need to make sure that when we have retailers of food, particularly the big chains, that they're not colluding to keep prices high because it hurts consumers. And folks will know that the NDP is very, very concerned about consumers getting a good shake, about consumer protection, and we talk about that in a number of ways as well, including consumer protection at the pumps where people are being gouged by big oil and gas.
Next question comes from Lorenda Redekop from CBC.
Hi, Lorenda.
Hi, Andrea. You've been bringing up these issues with long-term care. It's been a long pandemic. It's been more than 2 years that we've heard you talking about this. Now a lot of people seem to cite their number one issue as a lot of economic issues that they're dealing with. How do you counter that, desire for people to move on?
Well, in fact, it's actually important that people do understand that we can help them economically by taking some of the costs off of their plate when it comes to their healthcare system. So absolutely, long-term care is a huge issue, and we need to do better by our loved ones in long-term care. The fact that Doug Ford pretended he was going to put an iron ring around long-term care and then turned around and let 4,540 seniors lose their lives in horrifying ways in long-term care during the pandemic. We can never let that happen again. And certainly that's going to continue to happen with Ford cuts and with conservative cuts. So we have to prevent long-term care from getting worse and actually start investing in not only in long-term care, but in home care. People don't want to be institutionalized. They want the quality of care that they need right at home. And so our plan does that. But our plan also takes the burden of costs off of families in many, many ways. For example, you'll be able to get mental health services with your OHIP card, not your credit card. So we're going to expand access to mental health services, and we're going to make sure people can get those appointments with their OHIP card, just like you would go to a doctor's office. Similarly, with prescription drugs, people pay a lot of money out of pocket without having benefits at work. And even in some cases, people who have benefits at work are still paying thousands of dollars out of pocket because those plans don't quite cover the costs of the medications that they need. So we're going to fix all that. We're going to fix that by making sure you can get your prescription drugs with your OHIP card. We have a dental plan that we're going to bring forward. I don't know how many families I've spoken to, how many moms and dads have told me stories about not being able to take their kids to the dentist because they can't afford it, or after being at the dentist, having to wait months and months on end to save up to get their kids' fillings completed because they didn't have the money at the time of the appointment to get those fillings done. And in the meantime, they know that they're sending their kids out to school every day with pain in their mouths. So these are the kinds of things that we can not only fix because it's the right thing to do for the health and well-being of our families, of Ontarians. It also will take pressure off of other parts of the healthcare system. But importantly, it really does save you money in your pocketbook. And we have a number of plans in that regard. Getting the auto insurance industry under control and reducing auto insurance rates, outlawing gouging at the pumps when it comes to gas prices. Affordability is an important piece right now, and I understand that. People are having a hard time keeping a roof over their head. Young people are losing hope that they'll ever be able to own their own home. With these kinds of measures, including the ones that we have in our platform around affordability of housing, both rental housing, bringing rent controls back so those bad apple landlords can't continue to rent-evict tenants out of their homes, but also making sure that young people can have hope, getting some of the pressure out of that housing market, making sure it doesn't continue to spiral out of control, helping with your first down payment. There's many, many things in the NDP plan to help with affordability. Why? Because I hear it all the time. But affordability is two things. It's decent wages that pay the bills, so getting rid of Doug Ford's low-wage policy, Bill 124, making sure we have a $20 minimum wage in the province, and then that minimum wage keeps up with inflation, but also making sure that some of the expensive essentials that people are paying for right now out of their pockets are going to be provided through, for example, your OHIP card and other measures, because everyday people in Ontario should be able to afford everyday life. But over the last 4 years, with Doug Ford at the helm, we have all watched as life has gotten harder and harder. He has not made life easier for people. Life has become harder and harder. We cannot afford another 4 years of cuts to our healthcare system and of a premier who doesn't get how hard people are struggling day in and day out.
And for this follow-up, I wonder about hearing from both you, Andrea, and also Ron LeClair. This is an area where always in the conversation is jobs and the auto sector. The PCs seem to have brought that for people with the electric vehicle manufacturing. So how do you compete? And for Ron, like, what are you hearing at the doors about that?
I'll have a really quick response and then I'll pass it over to Ron. But what we saw is a premier get elected and pull electric vehicle charging stations out of the ground in Ontario. So he started off by sending a signal very clearly that he had no interest in electric vehicles. He had no interest in the climate impact of combustion engines. But the people in these communities, the people here in Windsor, know very well as the people in other parts of Ontario that are in manufacturing of vehicles in the auto sector, that is the way of the future. We also know that there is a plant that was looking to come to this area of Ontario to set up shop to be a feeder plant for some of the parts needed for the electric vehicle system. And unfortunately, the Ford government did nothing over the last 4 years to make sure that the electricity capacity was here to support that investment of the LG Chem plant. So I know for sure that we can do so much better when it comes to making sure that the electricity infrastructure is up and running to attract the investments necessary to really have a strong electric vehicle market here in Ontario, as well as manufacturing. But let's not forget, Doug Ford has no interest in helping everyday families afford their first electric vehicle. He has no intention whatsoever to provide EV incentives. We're the opposite. We have a robust plan in our platform for incentives for not only rebates for the purchases of or incentives for the purchases of vehicles, but also grants to help with the infrastructure to be put in your homes to help with ensuring you can charge your vehicles overnight. On that note, I do want to see have Ron say a few words as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So on the battery plant announcement, obviously we're really thrilled that that plant is coming to Windsor, Essex. But we need to understand who brought that plant to Windsor, Essex. And it wasn't Doug Ford. It was the vision of Unifor that made sure that they had a plan in their collective bargaining agreement to bring investment to Windsor, Essex. And that's why that's here, coupled with the work of the people that are in Windsor, those community partners like Invest Windsor, Essex, who worked on the ground. Doug Ford just showed up for the photo op days before an election. We need to look at his record and what he did bring to Ontario, or what he didn't bring to Ontario. He ripped out the infrastructure that was required for EV vehicles at a cost of over $200 million. He canceled the incentives, and that hurt us here in Windsor, Essex, because one of the vehicles that was eligible for EV incentives was built right here in Essex, the van plant in Windsor, Plant 3. One of their vehicles was a hybrid, and it was eligible for incentives. He canceled those. And now we have the LG Chem plant situation. What we see from that is the neglect of the Conservatives on providing the infrastructure that needs to be delivered. There's mixed messaging going out right now as to whether or not there's enough infrastructure for that plant. We've heard from the CEO of Invest Windsor Essex, and he's conceded that it doesn't exist. Shame on the Ford government for not making sure that that exists in our community. An NDP government will invest and build the infrastructure. And the fact that we don't have infrastructure here rests on the Liberals as well, because they are the ones that sold Ontario Hydro and made it private. If we had a government-run Ontario Hydro, we would not be in this situation. And to what I'm hearing on the doors, people are talking to me about health care, they're talking to me about education, and they're talking to me about affordability. They don't want a highway built at a cost of $10 billion in the Toronto area, because they know we can invest those funds into education, healthcare, and affordability issues. Those things that we knew were broken during the pandemic. They weren't broken during the pandemic. We learned from the pandemic that they were broken. And we need to fix those things first. Doug Ford's not going to fix those things. He's going to cut. He's taking money out of education in his budget that he tabled on the last day before we went to the writ. If that's a good news budget, I'm very worried about where Ontario's going. The Liberals aren't going to deliver because they're responsible for most of the things we need to fix because they had 15 years to fix them. So the only solution is a vote for Andrea Horwath in the NDP and Ron LeClair in Essex, Lisa Gretzky in Windsor West, and Gemma Gray Hall in Windsor Tecumseh, and we can make it better.
Thanks, Ron.
Yep.
Very good. Did you want to say something? I think Lisa Gretzky wanted to say a few words too about this topic.
Yeah. So just to provide a little bit of history, my husband is an auto worker. He works at Windsor Assembly. I worked very closely with Unifor Local 444 when the Windsor Assembly plant was eliminating third shift. Doug Ford wouldn't even bother to return a phone call or an email to the president of 444. He would not talk about thousands of jobs at risk here in our community. When NEMAC was closing and taking their business elsewhere, Doug Ford was nowhere in sight. It was New Democrats, it was Andrea in the legislature that stood with those workers and fought. It's gone through the court system. Doug Ford didn't say a word on it. And when you're looking at Oshawa, the GM plan, Doug Ford said in the legislature that ship has left the dock. So what I say about Doug Ford and the investments that have come here lately is Doug waited for the workers on the shop floor. My husband's been there 20-something years through uncertainty in the auto sector, while Doug Ford did nothing and the Liberals before them. So on the announcement specifically about the investment here for the EV batteries, Doug waited for the workers and the community agencies to cook the meal, to set the table, and all he had to do was come and eat. And all they have done, the Conservatives have done, is taken credit for the entire party. Not once have they given credit to the men and women on the shop floors, the unions, the bargaining committees, and the people in our community in Windsor, Essex, who have fought for years for those investments. So I think it's really shameful, very shameful, that the Conservatives still continue to try and take credit for everything that everybody else has done when all they have done is stood by and watch good automotive jobs leave our community.
Next question comes from Jack Howen from QP Briefing.
Hey, Jack.
Hi, Andrew. Yesterday, Global published an investigation into the child welfare system, finding a lot more use of restraints, a lot more injuries in some private service providers, sort of reminiscent of what we saw in the long-term care sector, which you've spoken about a lot. Is this something where the public system should totally take over as well?
I did read that article. I don't get a chance to read very many, but when I saw the headline, I just thought it was really important to make sure that I got a sense of where things are at. The troubling thing is this is not new in Ontario. I can remember back in the early mid-2000s, the then child advocate wasn't independent at that time. The then child advocate was raising the alarm bells about exactly the same thing that was outlined in that article. And it's really troubling that here we are over a decade later, and there continues to be the same problems. And what does that mean? It means that young people are being restrained. It means that there are very difficult situations that young people are facing where they're literally their physical well-being is at risk, where their mental health is at risk, and where companies, the ones that are making the profits off of these services, are the ones where the incidents are occurring at a much higher rate. So absolutely, we have to take a hard look at what's happening there. One of the things that Doug Ford did, though, was take away the independent oversight of children in care and of young people in care. He got rid of the independent child advocate, the very voice that those young people had for a couple of years, for a couple of terms in Ontario. There was a voice for those young people who was keeping an eye on these tragedies. His name was Irwin Alman. He's actually our candidate right now in Don Valley West, and I would urge the people of Don Valley West to consider supporting Irwin Alman. Why? Because Irwin knows exactly what's been going on in the children's care system, the group homes, and what's happening in those homes, what's happening in terms of the companies that are pulling profits out and treating children and young people so badly. We can fix that, but the best way to do that is with an NDP government that is prepared to provide not only the oversight, but that's prepared to step up and fix what's been broken, because those young people deserve so much better than the horrors that they face day in and day out in those group homes.
How do you fix that, though? You said you need to take a hard look. You've spoken quite passionately about taking profit out of long-term care. Should this be any different?
This is something that's been consistent with me and our party. When it comes to the most vulnerable in Ontario, whether that's childcare, so whether that's little ones in childcare who don't have the ability to or the capacity to advocate for themselves or to even let adults know if there's something going wrong, whether that's our seniors in long-term care, the folks in home care, or whether it's people young people in group homes. The profit motive does not belong in those kinds of facilities. The profit motive has nowhere, should be nowhere at all when it comes to those kinds of services. Why? Because we should never be using public money that's supposed to be supporting people who are vulnerable. That public money should never be going into the pockets of shareholders. It should never be going into the pockets of private corporations. We should be making those investments to every single penny to be going to the care of whether it's young people in group homes, whether it's children in childcare, whether it's seniors in home care and long-term care. Every single public dollar should be invested in their care. But the way things are, with Liberals first, well, in fact, Conservatives first, then Liberals, then Conservatives again, they want their buddies to be able to profit off of our public services. They want to privatize more of our healthcare system. They want to privatize more of home care, more of long-term care. New Democrats don't believe in that. Not only is it the wrong thing to do in terms of quality of care, we saw what happened during COVID. We saw that it was the for-profit long-term care homes that did a much worse job, that provided dismal levels of service during the pandemic. But we know that was happening before the pandemic. What we need to do is make sure that those services are public and that we can take care of people the way that they deserve. When you privatize all of these things, not only do public dollars go into the pockets of private corporations, the profits of the owners of these companies, but then we have to build a whole accountability structure to try to keep them accountable. And so that costs more public dollars as well. It makes no sense. Conservatives love to drive a message that somehow the private sector does it better. It doesn't. It doesn't do it better. Not in long-term care, not in child care, not in home care, not in community care, and not in care for vulnerable young people who are in the child welfare system.
Next question comes from Sanjay Maru from CTV News.
Hi, Sanjay.
Good morning. Andrea, you had mentioned earlier wanting to raise the minimum wage to $20 under an NDP plan. We've heard concerns from small businesses in the past few months, past few years, that raising the minimum wage would, of course, drive prices up and perhaps require them to lay off some of their own staff. What would be your response to those small business owners who might come forward with that concern?
Thanks very much, Sanjay, for the question. There is no doubt that small businesses took a huge hit, especially during COVID. And we saw Doug Ford. He prioritized the big box stores and let, everyday mom and pops wither on the vine. He was much more supportive of the Walmarts of the world. He got a call from the CEO of Walmart, and Walmart got whatever it wanted. And meanwhile, small businesses on main streets throughout our province were ignored by Doug Ford and his government. Even finally, at the end of the first year of COVID, finally a program came out, but we found out that people were getting money, companies were getting money that weren't even in Ontario from that program. There were swaths of small businesses that were left out of that support program. We think that small businesses still need support, and so we have a plan to continue with small business supports for the 2 more rounds of small business supports, because I've heard from small businesses that it's not over for them, that they're still struggling to get out from under the debt and the shrinkage of their businesses that happened during COVID. But I also want to let businesses know, small businesses particularly, that our minimum wage increase also includes a plan to help transition small business to be able to pay those wages. We understand that we need vibrant small businesses in our communities, not only because small business is really the biggest employer in Ontario when you look at all of the people that are employed at small businesses, but also because small businesses animate our communities. They give us opportunities to come together on main streets and in vibrant BIAs and business districts. And so we are very, very cognizant of the need to support small businesses and help them transition. However, people can't pay the bills. People are not able to pay the bills. So when we're asking big corporations like Walmart to pay a $20 minimum wage, they can afford it. When we're asking big corporations to make sure that the working people that help them make the profits and be successful, we know that the people that do that work deserve to have a wage that pays the bills. Everything is really expensive in Ontario, and it's getting more expensive. People deserve to be able to build a good life here, and we can only do that with a minimum wage that's appropriate. Look, we watched as the Liberals froze the minimum wage at $14 an hour for a very long time, and only at the very, very last minute, projecting after the election, they were going to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It was shameful. Absolutely shameful. It was a political ploy that was absolutely shameful after freezing the minimum wage for years. Then we get Doug Ford, and what does he do? He takes $6,000 out of the pockets of minimum wage workers by canceling the minimum wage increase. So although Mr. Ford likes to tell a tall tale about his support for working people these days, we know who Doug Ford is. He doesn't support working people. He canceled the minimum wage. He's got a Bill 124, which is a low-wage policy that's stifling the wage increases of our frontline essential heroes and forcing those people, nurses like the ones with me today, to leave their profession because they are not being respected by their premier. This is a premier who wouldn't bring paid sick days to Ontario during a raging pandemic. So people had to go to work sick because they had no choice. Their only choice was go to work sick or stay home and take care of yourself and not be able to pay your bills. We don't deserve a premier like that here in Ontario. We deserve a premier that really understands how important it is to respect working people and to make sure that they have a chance to build a great life in this great province. And that's myself, these wonderful candidates here. And I ask people, stop the cuts this time. Let's come together and stop the cuts and build the kind of Ontario that we can all be proud of, where your kids have hope again that they can buy their own home, where your kids know, or where you know, that if your kids are struggling after COVID-19, that they can get the mental health care that they need, where the essentials that keep you healthy and provide relief from the pocketbook are paid for through your OHIP card and not your credit card. These are things that we can do. We can come together and fix the things that matter so much to people and really begin to help people have hope for the future, that they can build a great life here and make sure that their government is on their side and is making the kinds of changes that make life easier, not harder.
So we'll move to any questions that journalists on Zoom might have. As a reminder, please use the raise hand function to let us know if you have a question, and we'll let you know when you can go ahead. You can also feel free to type into the chat box. I'll give folks a quick second to throw up their hands. Okay, seeing no questions on Zoom this morning, I'll turn it back to you, Andrea.
Thanks very much. I want to once again thank the nurses that are here with us today. The nurses know what we need to fix healthcare, yes, and we're all grateful for all of the work that you always do. And just know that together we can stop the cuts. We can invest in our healthcare system. We can invest in home care. We can invest in community care and in long-term care, and we can make sure that you are respected and have the dignity that you deserve on the job, because you deserve that. So thank you so much. Thank you to Lisa Gretzky, to Gemma Gray-Hall, and to Ron LeClair. And I would just say to the people in the great communities of the Windsor area, get out and vote. June 2nd on Thursday is election day. Vote for these fantastic people, and you can stop the cuts and make the investments in home care and health care that we all deserve. Thanks so much, everyone.